One of the things I love about doing this podcast is that we get to dive into real issues that affect real midlife women. When it comes to our partnerships and sex, there are sometimes things that we feel powerless to change and end up accepting a situation instead of dealing with it head on. My next guest has made it her mission to help individuals and couples get the most out of their relationships and take a path that moves them forward, not the path that keeps them stuck. Give this one a listen. You're not going to want to miss it. Health, wellness, career, family, life, and the better side of 50. I'm your host, Michelle Folan, and this is Asking for a Friend. Welcome to Asking for a Friend. Today's guest expert is Julie Lingler. She is a licensed sex and relationship therapist and also has a master's degree in social work. Her counseling career began over 20 years ago at Cancer Family Care, and in 2005, she started her own private practice where she works with individuals, couples, parents, and LGBTQ clients. Welcome to the show, Julie.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I've been looking forward to this discussion for quite some time, ever since you and I first spoke. This happens very often that I will speak to one of our guests and I think, oh my gosh, I wish I would have just had the microphone running at the time because it really was really good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully we can recreate that today. But first of all, just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Counseling therapy is my third career. I have an undergrad in English. My first career, I was a retail store manager for a couple of years, sold women's clothes. Decided that wasn't really for me and ended up doing fundraising and volunteer management and public relations for a bunch of nonprofits in Cincinnati and Dayton while my kids were really pretty young. When they were 5 and 7, I went back to grad school to get my master's in social work because I decided I wanted to be a therapist. So I did grad school full time for a couple of years while my kids were little. And my then husband was working a bunch of hours. He was an accountant, and so he was working a bunch of hours. So that was a really challenging time in our lives, raising kids, school full time, him working his really challenging career. Got out of grad school and spent almost 3 years at Cancer Family Care, helping cancer patients and their families navigate life-threatening illness. And that's really when I decided what I loved to do was the relationship part of it. I was trained to work with major mental illness. So I was trained to work with schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, personality disorders. That was what my education and my internships were in. But when I got to Cancer Family Care, I decided what I really enjoyed doing was helping people figure out their relationships and navigate those. And so when I started my own practice in 2005, that's really what I chose to focus on. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And when I'm not doing therapy, which I happen to love doing. I'm a scuba diver. I love to travel. I've got 2 adult children now who are just delightful men. I have 2 wild and crazy dogs and a cute little house in Mount Lookout.
Wonderful. And for those of you that aren't from Cincinnati, Mount Lookout is a beautiful little suburb here in town. I used to live there as well at one time. You really check off a lot of boxes, I think, for your clients in your ability to be able to relate to a broad scope of people, it sounds like.
I think that's one of my strengths as a therapist. I came to it later in life, and now I'm 56, soon to be 57. And I have a business background from living with my husband for 29 years. I worked in the nonprofit sector, and so I worked with a lot of business people. I have a wide range of experiences. And then coming into therapy, one of my superpowers, I think, is being able to take what are sometimes strange and to some people complex therapeutic concepts and put them in the language of whoever it is I'm talking to. So I speak differently to an engineer than I do to a doctor, than I do to a musician, than I do to a painter, because they all have different contexts for language. I think I'm good at doing that.
Okay, that's wonderful. When someone comes to see you, and we're talking midlife people, men, women.
Yep.
What are you most often seeing? Why are they coming to you?
Well, I'm going to tell you that that's changed since COVID. So I'll give you the pre-COVID and the post-COVID answer. The pre-COVID answer is I saw really people from three different contexts. The first context, and this was fairly common, was what I would call a stage of life issue. They are either newly married, maybe not their first marriage. So they're joining families, they're blending kids, they're figuring out how to live together, they're figuring out the challenges of being newly cohabitating or newly married in this relationship. That was one group of people. Another group of people were the soon to be empty nesters and or the soon to be retirees who were recognizing that their years of building careers, building homes and building families were winding down, and now they were just looking at each other and saying, "Oh my gosh, who are you? Who am I? Do we even still like each other? What do we want these next 30 years of our lives to look like?" Because when you're so focused on career and family and your community, it's easy to lose sight of the dynamic between the two of you. When all of that starts to go away, then the two of you really become the central focus. And if you haven't been paying attention to that, that can be really intimidating and off-putting and scary. And then the third group were people who'd had some really big event in their relationship. We think of big events being affairs, and that is often the case, but that is not only the case. There were other big events like gambling problems or unknown financial problems that threatened the relationship, or in-laws moving in, or big health problems that they needed to navigate. Some big event that threw their relationship into a tailspin. And those were really the three pre-COVID contexts that I saw. I still see all of those, but then there is this fourth context. And you and I talked about this in our initial phone call, that COVID exposed the fault lines in a lot of relationships that people didn't realize were there. People thought they had it pretty good. And then COVID hit and the pandemic hit, and everything around that came into being for 2+ years. And it exposed a lot of the fault lines in a lot of relationships. And so I'm seeing a lot of people who I may not have seen if we hadn't had COVID, because they would have just kept doing what they were doing and going along just fine. But that pandemic completely threw their lives into a tailspin. And so I'm seeing that fourth group of people now as well.
Okay. That's really, really interesting. When you're talking to these people and there's a post COVID
Tailspin.
tailspin,
Mm-hmm.
what specifically is it that people are coming to you with their concerns?
Well, if you think about the way most of us live our lives, at least one in most couples goes to work, if not both. And we are busy raising children. We usually have friends that we spend time with. We very often have activities that we go to places to do, like we go to the gym, we go to our yoga class, we travel, we go to dinner. So we're not spending all of our time sequestered 24/7 in one building with the same group of people. And when we get up and we go to these things, we're getting dressed in our clothes, we're showering, we're looking good, we're walking out the door. We have interesting things to talk about when we come back to each other at the end of the day. And we don't see each other 24/7. When COVID hit, and really in the beginning of the lockdown, when we really weren't going anywhere, and we were trying to figure out how to work from home. Now you're in this house and you wake up, and I don't know about you, but some days when I'm not seeing clients, I may not shower till midday. So you wake up, you're not showering, you're working and living and breathing in the same space as this person that you've never done that with before. You don't have your usual distractions of being able to go out and see friends. And you don't even have your usual distractions of being able to bring friends in to see you, because those restrictions were pretty severe for quite some time. You don't really have a whole lot to talk about because you're in each other's space the whole time. There's frustration and tension around, if you're a two-career couple, figuring out how both of you are going to work at home. And you may not have the space to do that. And you may not have the bandwidth, literally the internet bandwidth, to do that. And so you're trading off, right? And we don't see our spouses at work. I've had several people say, I really don't like who he or she is when he or she is working. I don't like what I hear. I don't like the way they act. I don't like the way they sound. I don't like the way they talk to other people. I don't like their work self. I like their personal self, but I don't like their work self. And never having seen that before, now we're face to face with And one of them that I'm thinking of in particular, Michelle, she's a litigator and she's a lovely woman. A lovely woman. She's a litigator and she's not from Cincinnati. I see clients from all over the state of Ohio. So she's not, nobody would know her. She's not even
Mhm.
from here. And so when she's talking to people in her litigator persona, she's a tough bulldog of a person. And then she's just this lovely person at home with her husband. And he's listening to her at work and he's saying, I wouldn't want to be in a room with her. I'm not sure I know her. I'm not sure I like her anymore. That's extreme, but that has happened more than once.
Yeah.
The things that we allowed to distract us and to gloss over some of our partners and our own shortcomings and blind spots are now no longer there. And we're face to face with each other, warts and all. It has created some real challenges for people.
Interesting. Okay. You mentioned something before too about that shift in our midlife years when we go from being immersed in our children to being empty nesters.
Mm-hmm.
How can couples make this more positive in terms of their relationship? Because I know quite a few people, and this came up. I had two different listeners that brought this up as an issue that they are currently having in their own relationships.
Okay. The first thing I would say is prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So if you can keep your relationship central to your life all through your life, it makes it much easier when your children are grown and you're looking at retirement and empty nesting. That is ideal, but oftentimes, particularly for your audience, they haven't necessarily done that. So now they're figuring out what to do on the back end of that. And I would say that a big part of that is rediscovering who you yourself are at midlife when you're not somebody's wife, somebody's mother, somebody's life partner, but who are you just as a person? And what do you like? And what do you enjoy doing? And what fun and interesting things do you bring to your relational table? And encourage your partner to do the same outside of their roles as partner and parent and worker. Who are they as a person? And what do you bring to your relational table? And realize that you're going to have to learn each other all over again, that who you are at 50 is not who you were when you married, probably in your 20s or 30s, that you're different, and understand and know yourself. I can't tell you how many people I see where one or both partners, and usually, I'll tell you, usually it's the female because she's been most immersed in child rearing, says, I don't even know what I like. I don't know what I like to do. I've got all this time. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. And she's, in many cases, looking for her male partner to fill that gap. Some of that can happen, but she also needs, and we all need to bring something interesting to the table. We need to be interesting to our partners and interested in them. And so that would be one idea that I would have and that I tell people all the time is try to figure out what makes you tick, what turns you on, what makes you happy, what lights you up, and bring that to your relationship.
And we talk about midlife pivots,
Uh-huh.
finding your passion and your purpose. Because for those of us that have careers outside the home, oftentimes that's not always what fills our void.
Exactly.
And I think if you haven't had that, it can be tough. Do you put people through a certain exercise to try to get them to be able to find what that is?
We do a lot of different things together depending upon where they're challenged, but having people give some thought to when you were 9 or 10 or 11, when you were a kid and you were playing, what kinds of things did you like to do? Not that you're necessarily going to recreate those, but if you like to draw and create things artistically, can you figure out whether art is something you're still interested in? If you ran around the house singing at the top of your lungs, by the way, that would be me, can you figure out a way to sing again? Because who we are when we're in those 9 to 12-year age ranges is really, in some ways, our purest, most playful, most authentic self for a lot of us. And so to go back and say, are there things that you can bring from the years in your childhood into your nowhood that still might light you up? And then I give people permission to just go play and experiment, try something. You don't have to commit to it forever. Take a piano lesson. You don't have to buy the whole piano. Go swing a golf club. You don't have to sign up for a country club membership. Try a few things. See what appeals to you. And also, service to others is really important, particularly for people who've been home taking care of children or whose primary responsibility that has been. Not having someone to take care of and not having a way to give of themselves can feel really empty. So I suggest finding other ways to give back, other ways to be generative in the way you live and generous with your time and your energy, and fill that need to be important in that way. And that can help too.
And sometimes it's caring for aging parents as well.
Absolutely, it can be. We're kind of stuck in the middle of that. Kids are grown, parents are aging. We're kind of stuck in the middle.
Right. And once that is gone, it's like, now what do I do? So I love your advice. I think that's fabulous. I had a guest on the show at the beginning. It was Dr. Somi Javed.
Yep.
And you said you know her.
I do. I love Somi. She's great.
Yeah, she is. She's wonderful. And she has a statistic that 49% of women stop being sexually active post-menopause.
Mm-hmm.
You think that's accurate? Is that what you see in your practice?
Well, I think we need to maybe define what we mean by sexually active. So if we're talking about solo sex, masturbation, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily the case. If we're talking about partnered sex, I would say that that may be more the case, although I don't know the statistic. And if we're talking about partnered sex with a partner you've been with for the vast majority of your adult life, I would say that that might even be more likely to be true. Because if you think about it, if you've been having sex with the same person and that same person has been having sex with you pretty much exclusively for decade upon decade, and you don't have a really adventurous spirit when it comes to sex, it gets boring.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not as pleasurable, I heard your podcast with Somi, if it's not as pleasurable because the hormones are not in balance, because lubrication doesn't work as well, because the physical changes that we go through at menopause can make it less pleasurable, even if it's not painful. It doesn't feel in our 50s the way it felt in our 20s. If it's less pleasurable, if it's potentially painful, and if it's not exciting and new and interesting, it could be pretty easy to just say, I'll take a pass. When you factor into that mid-age men also are having less sex,
Mm-hmm.
because for them, the hormones are, and the aging and the difficulty getting and maintaining an erection and the difficulty getting and maintaining an erection to orgasm. So they are probably asking for it less frequently. I find that to be true. And then it's easier to just say, I'd rather not tonight. I'm tired. It's late. I've got a full belly. I've got a headache, whatever.
And so I guess really the advice here would be get a physical, get some blood work, make sure your physiology, everything's in working order.
Yep.
Because we can't fix what's going on up in the head if we've got the physical thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I always say there's no reason to throw a psychological solution at a medical problem or a physical issue. So definitely get all of that checked out. Now, assuming all of that checks out, then there are some things that come into play that are more relational and more emotional and more mental health oriented, although probably not even mental health oriented, just more relational, more about how you approach sex, what your attitude about sex is, by what measure you use that statement that they're no longer sexual. Because I'm going to tell you that the vast majority of people I see still masturbate, whether they're having partnered sex or not. So there is still sexual arousal, there is still sexual pleasure, there is still sexual release via orgasm. They're doing that. They just may not be doing that with each other. The number of people who are not doing any of that, I would have to say in my practice over the last 20 plus years has been really, really small. So there's always some sort of sexual behavior going on, but it may not be with a partner.
Got it. Okay. One of my listeners asked about sexual dysfunction on her partner's side.
Uh-huh.
And he had prostate cancer.
Yep.
Had what they said was a nerve-sparing prostatectomy, but it didn't quite work that way.
Mm-hmm.
When you have couples like that in your practice where there is true sexual dysfunction, how do you get these people so that they have and can build a connection physically?
So one of the things that's challenging in our culture, Michelle, is that we think of sex as being penis and vagina. And there's so much more to sexual expression that has absolutely nothing to do with penis and vagina, as all of the lesbians in the world will tell you. There's so so much more to it than that.
Right.
And if we take a look at whether sex is successful or not based on, can a man get an erect penis, put it in a woman's vagina, penetrate enough that one or both of them have an orgasm, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we take a look at sexual expression as being bigger than that, as being about being physically close, as being about providing each other sensual and sexual pleasure, as being about connecting on an intimate, primal level, because sex is very primal. It goes beyond words. It's a very primitive connection. If we can look at it that way, expand the vocabulary and expand the capacity for pleasure, giving and receiving, and for physical connection, giving and receiving, to go beyond requiring an erect penis and an orgasm, then you open the door for lots of things that can bring pleasure and joy and connection that may have nothing to do with how hard a man's penis gets or whether it gets hard at all.
Right. Right. I think you have to build this base of intimacy almost before you can go to the next level. You have to make sure both of you want that.
Yes.
There has to be a little teamwork.
Absolutely. And if pleasure is the measure, which is a phrase from one of my favorite sex educators, Emily Nagoski, she says, pleasure is the measure. So if pleasure is the measure, then if you both are enjoying what's happening between the two of you, there is no other goal. There is no other expected or must-have outcome. Whatever happens, if you're enjoying it, it's good. People who have difficulty having what we think of as sex, penis in vagina, penetration till orgasm, for whatever set of reasons, there are lots of other opportunities out there to have physical connection and physical pleasure and intimacy and love and sharing and giving and receiving that have nothing to do with that.
You know what? That's important in any relationship.
It absolutely is. What really angers my sex therapist colleagues and I, and my sex educator colleagues and I, is this idea that there's foreplay and there's sex. It's all sex.
Yeah.
People say, I want more foreplay. It's all sex. Again, we're very heteronormative and sort of male oriented in this. We really think of sex as being intercourse, but it's everything else as well. So sex can be anything that is an expression of your sexuality and your sexual connection with another human or your sexual connection with yourself. It is not just limited to that.
It can be just being playful in the kitchen while you're making dinner.
Yes. Flirting and kissing and touching and play. Sex is meant to be fun and playful, as well as deeply emotional and connecting, as well as kind of hot and wild. It's meant to be all those things and then some.
How do we keep it from getting boring?
Well, so if you are a heterosexual couple, one of my absolute favorite books is a book called 101 Nights of Great Sex.
Oh,
I love this book.
I'm going to put that one in the show notes. Okay.
Here's why I love this book. It's a book of 50 for her and 50 for him ideas of sexual things to try. The sheets are folded in half, so it'll say on the front for her eyes only, and she'll pull it out and open it up, and there is a template or a menu or a script for a sexual activity to try with him. But she's the female and it's for her. And then there's one for him as well. And there are 50 each. And then the last one is one for both of you. So you both participate. So it's like she says, tonight is my night and I'm going to. And then the next time they have sex is his night. But it gives you lots of interesting ideas of things to do that you can modify to suit your particular situation or your preferences. You can take one out and go, oh, hell no, I'm not doing that, and throw it away and try another one. But it gives you some ideas and some jumping off points for how to have more interesting, fun sex with your partner.
And hopefully have a laugh. I mean, come on.
Yes.
If you can't have a good giggle.
If you can't giggle during sex.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you're doing it wrong if you can't giggle during sex.
Yeah. Well, and also, why does it have to be 101 nights? Why can't you just like do 2 or 3 in one night? That
You can, and it doesn't have to be night. It can be 101. You can do it in the morning over breakfast
right.
on the kitchen table.
I love it. I love it.
It's a great book, and it gives people very doable. None of these things are things that require lots of equipment or props. It gives people very doable, interesting sexual scenarios. And a lot of them are less about the actual sex act itself and more about the build up to it and the romance and the intrigue and the mystery and the playfulness and the fun and the flirtiness, a lot of which gets lost when you're in the middle of building careers, building families, building homes, living life. It's hard to keep that spark and that sparkle alive. It takes effort and intention and energy to do that.
You said that, and it made me think of, now, say what you want about this person. Dr. Laura Schlesinger, her philosophy is you got to treat your spouse like your boyfriend or your girlfriend.
Yes.
Don't get away from that, right?
Right. Never stop dating each other. Never stop dating each other. One of the pieces of homework I often give couples is I'll tell them that I want them to pretend like they're single, like they're on a date with someone they don't know, and show up for a date with each other, bringing your best self. I'll say to the women, put on makeup, put on a little perfume. I'll say to the dudes, brush your teeth really well and bring something interesting to the table. Hold her chair for her, open the door, sparkle. Bring your interesting conversation and your interesting stories. Don't talk about your kids and the bills and your in laws and the house needs a new roof. Talk about something interesting. Pretend you're on a date and do that often. Win your spouse back. Keep their interest, keep their intrigue.
Modern Family had an episode where they meet at some clandestine place, and he's Sven, who's in industrial sales.
Yep.
And they meet each other at the bar.
Mm-hmm.
You got to get creative.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You do. And I think all of us have had the experience at least once or maybe more frequently of being somewhere with our partner and catching them across the room and going, oh, he's really hot. Or for the men out there, oh, she's really pretty. Like, I'm with her, I'm with him. And seeing them with new eyes, we can cultivate that. We don't have to wait for that to catch us unawares. We can purposely cultivate that. And that's really important because that's part of the fun of being in a relationship is actually liking the person you're in a relationship with.
Yeah.
And being likable to them.
Right. And you can be in love with someone, but not necessarily like them.
Yes.
Yeah, it's important.
Yes. And that was one of the things, to circle back to an earlier topic, that was one of the things that came up a lot in my post-COVID therapy sessions is being around them all the time. I realized I don't like them as much as I thought I did.
Mm.
And those who are self-aware will say, and I realize I'm probably not as likable either. Because when you're with somebody 24/7 in a close quartered environment, it's easy to not be likable and it's easy not to like them very much. I don't like to say relationships take work. I like to say relationships take intention, attention, and energy.
What do you do, though, when you have a couple sitting in front of you and one or both are not being self-aware? I mean, you got to unpack that first because otherwise you're not going to get anywhere.
Mm-hmm. You're right. One of my favorite questions to people in that situation is, what do you think it's like to be on the receiving end of you?
Mm.
What do you think it's like to be her in this relationship with you? Or what do you think it's like to be him sitting in this relationship with you? I want you to give that some thought. Tell me what you think it's like to be the other person in this relationship. And sometimes I'll do it with both of them. Sometimes I only do it with one because the topic makes sense under the circumstances. But some people are really good at being able to perspective take and say, oh, it probably doesn't feel good when or it probably works really well if I instead, whatever the behavior is. And some people are not. And so, then we maybe need to go a little bit further and do an individual session or two with one or both members of the couple just to kind of dive deep into, this is your responsibility in this dynamic. And until you stop doing this, things aren't going to get better. And this is her responsibility or his responsibility. And until he or she stops doing that, things aren't going to get better. So you both have to step into it. But there are a lot of people who are walking around not being really clear on what it's like to be opposite them in any situation.
Yeah, they're not owning it quite yet.
Not yet.
Yeah. All right. So I had one other question from one of the listeners
Sure.
dealing with an affair,
Yeah.
and affair was over 4 or 5 years ago,
Uh-huh.
but it's still dragging them down.
Mm.
Says she still hasn't probably truly forgiven him.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you do with couples that are dealing with infidelity?
Oh gosh, that's a really big question. I do lots of things, but can I answer this one particular thing about forgiveness first? Can I address that first?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So there's a really great book that I love that I suggest to people, and it's called How Can I Forgive You? And the author is Janis with an S, Abram Spring, like the season. And the reason that I love this book is because, and I am not Jewish, but my understanding from reading this book, and the author is Jewish, she's a Jewish psychologist. My understanding is that in the Jewish faith, forgiveness is something that you have to earn, it's not something that you give. In the Christian faith, forgiveness is something you give. In the Jewish faith, it's something that the other person has to earn. And so, what I love about that for couples is oftentimes when there's an affair, the person who had the affair will say, well, just forgive me. Just forgive me. And the person who did not have the affair feels compelled to forgive without the offender, to use that word lightly, doing really much of anything to earn the forgiveness. And she goes on to say in the book that sometimes it has to be earned consistently over the lifetime of the relationship. So it's not a one and done. And in the Christian faith, we think of it as a one and done. The book really details, I think it's a 10-step process that the offender and the one who's been hurt go through together for the offender to earn the forgiveness of the other person. And she writes about it from the perspective of affairs, but not only affairs. She writes about it from other kinds of betrayal as well. And the examples that she gives are other kinds of betrayals, not just affairs. And so I would suggest to this particular listener of yours and anybody else who's dealing with this to check that book out because it's really wonderful. She writes about it from her own personal perspective. I'm not speaking out of school here. She would say this if she were here. Her first husband had an affair with their nanny when she was getting her doctorate. And they divorced, and she remarried, and he remarried the nanny. And once their children were grown and getting to the ages where they were going to be married, she realized they were going to have to be spending a lot of time together at, wedding functions and engagement parties and whatnot. And she hadn't really forgiven him yet. So she had to go through this process herself. And she wrote the book as a result of that. It's super powerful and really approachable and would be maybe very helpful for this particular listener.
I'm adding that one to the show notes as well.
Yeah, it's a really good book.
Some great resources for our listeners. I do want to talk a little bit about teletherapy and how important it has been to your practice, not just during COVID, but
Mm-hmm,
post COVID. Is
mm-hmm.
this a trend that we'll continue to see?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's wonderful. I didn't do a lot of it prior to COVID. I was in the office, and occasionally, if someone was out of town, we'd do a telehealth session, but rarely. And then, of course, during COVID, we all went completely virtual. Many of us are going back into the office in some sort of hybrid form. And I am doing that as well. But what's really great about it for people in general and for couples in particular is you can be anywhere like you and I are talking now, and I feel as if we're sitting in the same room, despite the fact that we're not. And you can be anywhere. So for couples, so many times, particularly if they have careers and or children, getting to physically the same place at the same time for a therapy session was really difficult. When I was officed in Blue Ash, I knew many couples where one would be coming from downtown and would have to leave work maybe 45 minutes or an hour early just to get to the therapy session, and then spend the 50 minutes in therapy and then have to maybe go back to the office or go home. You're talking about a 3-hour time commitment there. And both of them would have to make that commitment to be in the same place at the same time. So, as a couples therapist, for me, one of the beautiful parts about teletherapy is that you can be in very different places. One of you can be at a kid's practice or a kid's game. One of you can be at work. One of you can be at home, and you can dial in from wherever you happen to be. It's also great for couples who are really going through a tough time and are contentious and don't really want to be sitting next to each other.
Ah,
They can do the work from completely different places, and that feels maybe a little safer and a little less intimidating than sitting next to the person you're in an argument with. I have a lot of couples who've had affairs who could come into the office who don't want to, because the one who did not have the affair says, I don't want to be sitting next to them.
hmm.
I don't want to be anywhere near them right now. To be able to do that is also really good. And so for people, it's a convenience. It cuts down the time that therapy takes when you take out commute time both ways. It can cut down the cost of childcare if you need to do that. You don't have to leave work early necessarily for it. And it's the way our world is going. So I'm going to be consistently hybrid. I'm going to do a little bit of both. There are therapists who only do video these days, and then there are therapists who only do in person. But I think this hybrid model makes a whole lot of sense. And all the research we have indicates it is every bit as effective as in-person therapy. Every bit as effective.
Well, it sounds then like teletherapy is going to be around for the long haul.
It is. As many people now telecommute and as many people now find efficacy of working that way and can work from anywhere, so they're going to be traveling more. I mean, I know a lot of people who are becoming sort of digital nomads. They're traveling a lot and working from there. Their therapy would have to be interrupted if the only place they could see me was my office.
Right, right. Great point. It's a great point. I think we're all telecommuting some way, shape, or another.
Yeah,
You and I know that with all the topics we could cover, that we're going to have to do at least 2 shows.
at least.
Let me tell you what the requests are, because not only did I get people's questions, but they also said, hey, can we cover XYZ?
Sure.
Let me tell you what's on people's minds.
Okay.
I have a request to talk about post-divorce, dating, and also the blended family.
I can do that from a personal and a professional perspective. I've done both.
Okay. We're going to write that one down as a topic for our next show.
Uh-huh.
LGBTQ topics,
Got it.
whether it's a spouse or partner issue or child issue.
Yep.
I'm hearing more and more of this lately, and I think we've got a whole nother show right there.
Absolutely. That could be at least one show, if not 2 or 3, all on its own.
Okay. So I have one last question to ask you.
Yes.
It's kind of personal.
Okay. Go ahead.
So if you could go back, what would you want your 40-year-old self to know?
Oh, I can absolutely answer this. What would I want my 40-year-old self to know? I would want my 40-year-old self to know that I have everything I need, either within me or at my fingertips, to live an amazing life to 90 or older.
Ah, I love that. And see, we don't know that at 40 necessarily.
Yeah, I was just starting my private practice.
Yeah.
In 2005, I was 40. I was just starting my private practice. And oh my gosh, if I had known that I could do it, like if I had known I could do it, like I figured I could do it, but if I had known that everything I needed was either in me or at my fingertips and I would be okay, I would have soared so much sooner.
Ah, I just love that. And you know what? I love being 58. I really wish I knew then what I know now.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I love 56. 57's 2 months away and I can't wait.
Yeah.
It's a great decade. My 50s are a great decade.
Well, happy early birthday.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you being here today.
This has been so much fun. I'm glad you're going to have me back again. I can't wait to talk about other things.
Oh, I can't wait. I have so much to share with our listeners. And real quick, where can people find you? You have a website.
I do. JulieLingler.com. JulieLingler.com.
Got it.
That's where I am.
I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Julie, thank you.
This has been a pleasure. Just a delight.
We'll talk soon.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Follow Asking for a Friend on social media outlets and provide a review and share this show wherever you get your podcasts. Reviews and sharing help us grow.